I have here with me today Rajesh Anandan, the CEO of Ultranauts and creator of the Biodex and Team X. It's a tool that helps you articulate what you need to do great work and easily share that with your colleagues, your friends, whoever might be better to understand you. I'm Clare Kumar, of course, the host of this show on Fishbowl Live. It's Happy Space Hot Topics migrated here, and we're thrilled to have you with us. We've been talking about the Biodex. We've been talking about the Happy Space work style profile, and that's the tool that I've created to do a very similar thing, help you articulate what you need to do your best work. And right now, I just asked Rajesh, what what impact has it had, the Biodex, have you seen at work, at Ultranauts and beyond?
So, the Biodex has been used internally for years now, and it's had many forums. Like one of the forums is a Slack bot, so you just single command at Biodex um, slash, the person's username and then feedback or availability. It'll just um, give you those relevant fields, or you can pull up the whole profile. We now have this
Mm.
public version that's not a bot, or there's no, it's a much simpler version where you can create a shared profile that have a web page you can share with anyone else. The ways we've seen this used internally, certainly when, let's say, whenever a new teammate joins a team, they have a biodex. Everybody else has a biodex. So you can imagine how much easier it is to integrate with a team when you can simply just look up everybody's biodex, see all of their preferences, and then some more kind of, let's say, nuanced expressions of, for example, what does it mean to someone to feel heard or feel a sense of belonging, or habits that they might have adopted to stay productive or things that are distracting for them.
Mm.
In addition to this very simple like feedback preferences and interaction preferences. Um, we and so it makes forming new teams or inheriting a team if you're a manager or joining a new team if you're a new hire a lot smoother. And we've seen now the same sort of results as other teams have used it, whether those teams are neurodiverse or mostly neurotypical. It doesn't really matter because humans all have different optimal modes for communicating, for collaborating, for ingesting information, for um, uh, kind of organizing your work day and chunking your work, etc. And so this has just become a very simple kind of cheat sheet to help ease the friction of
Mhm.
figuring out how to work with another human. And so we're seeing that certainly around new hires. We've also seen it now as we've taken it, other teams have started using the Biodex as part of a more in-depth service we have called Team X. And the Biodex is kind of step one of like, okay, first start by getting to know each other before we
Mhm.
start getting very precise about the sort of barriers that are impeding the performance of a team, and then making very precise recommendations on how to unblock those barriers as a team
Mhm.
based on who's on the team and what those individual teammates actually need to do their best work. And so instead of focusing on a single dimension of a person, is someone autistic or an ADHD or neurotypical? Well, that's interesting, but it's not particularly useful in the context of doing work together,
Mhm.
because all that single label leaves you with is a whole bunch of cliches and stereotypes, which may or may not hold true for a particular person.
Mhm.
Or knowing someone's gender or race, all of those things might have some place in society, but when you're trying to get work done together, you've got to get a lot more practical. And the Biodex is that kind of tool that allows you to skip ahead to the practical part. And so,
Yeah.
we've seen it be useful even with teams that have been working together for years,
Mhm.
where after kind of going through the TeamX exercise, starting with the Biodex, and we have a team Biodex tool that combines a bunch of these things. And we'll have teammates say, I've been working with you for years. I didn't know that's how you fill in the
Right.
blank.
Right.
Yeah.
Because before this, in your career, did you ever have conversations like this about how do you think, how do you process, how do you work? Did it ever come up?
No. And it was always delivered as one size fits all quote training
Yeah.
for,
Yeah.
managers or leaders or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad place to start. Like, it's not a bad place to start with a theoretical foundation of,
Right.
what
Right.
works and why does it work. But it's really difficult to hop from all of that theory and good practice to action of what's the one thing I need to change next week that's going to
Mhm.
have the most impact given the team I'm working with and the thing we're focused on we're working on right now.
Right. So hyper practical in terms of applying it to the work with the people that you're working on. I'm curious for anyone who's listening now on Fishbowl Live. I can see you all, Rachel, Andrew, Sarah, Kwame. I'm pretty sure I've seen Kwame before. So welcome back. Who here has a sense that this would be helpful and would be useful in their organization? Feel free to come up on stage if you have a question, or if you have an idea of, gosh, well, I'd like to see this. Is this in the Biodex or the work style profile? One of the things that I've included in the work style profile, and I'm curious if it has what part it plays, Rajesh, in your conversations. I have a section called Nuance is Necessary. And I ask questions about what's important to you. Who are your dependents? Is it people, pets, and even plants? I know someone with a bonsai garden, for example. That man cannot be away from his place without serious preparation because about 50 plants, 100 plants would die, and some of them are 150 years old. I mean, there's a bunch of nuance in here as to what's important to people, and does that have a part to play?
Yes and no. So in the Biodex, it's really focused on um, information about how you do your work.
Hmm.
It doesn't sort of get into the context of why you do your work or what things are motivating to you versus not. In the sort of Team X version of this, where we do apply quite a bit of AI, we're able to take a group, a team, whether that's a project team or a functional team, and arrive at some really useful insights about that group. So, for example, um, we were working with a data engineering group that was using Team X, and the team leader was struggling with just trying to get the team to collaborate because it was actually a hybrid team that had some data scientists, some data engineers, and they just didn't. They were speaking different languages, and and most cross functions have this dynamic. And so on the surface, the problem was I need these people to collaborate. Like I
Hmm.
need our team to collaborate. There's too much friction.
Hmm.
Um, and they onboarded a team. Actually, it just takes 30 minutes to set up, and immediately the kind of insight from Teamex that was generated was the problem you have is you have kind of information silos that are emerging, where you have two or three teammates who believe that the way they can contribute to the team is by putting their head down and getting their work done.
Hmm.
So that means anytime they spend sharing updates or joining meetings or updating their knowledge base is actually is destroying value. So they're just not going to do it. They're trying to add value.
Hmm.
That's not right or wrong. It's just what it is. And then you have a bunch of other teammates who are waiting on and needing information from those silos of knowledge in order to do their work. And so to your point earlier about privacy, like we don't share even with Team X, where we're providing really specific insights to the team. We don't say who is what. It doesn't matter. What matters is your knowledge silos. And the reason you have knowledge silos is people are struggling to balance the sort of pressure to deliver faster
Mm.
individually with the needs of the team for shared knowledge. And so once you have that diagnosis, again, the system can generate recommendations that are very practical based on that understanding of the humans and the dynamics. Or like another case with Team X, we had a team that was trying to upskill across a bunch of teams. Technology is changing fast, et cetera, et cetera. And they tried sending these teams to workshops and webinars and all this stuff, a whole series of them, and not much change. And so when we did Team X, and it starts with the Biodex, but Biodex has all these other inputs that we can then start to put together. And we surfaced two really interesting things. One is half the people on all these teams had very little kind of organizational trust, meaning they were unlikely to believe that if they applied effort into learning and upskilling, that it would be recognized or rewarded. Because that's not what they'd experienced in the past, whether it's at this organization or something else, right?
You bring your past work trauma with you.
Right, exactly. And so what that means is that half the group has, low motivation to invest in learning and development, given
Mm-hmm.
this sort of
Mm-hmm.
context. Then we looked at optimal design of learning, and you could think of, so learning styles is like a figment of imagination. There is no such thing, is what the evidence would say, even though we'd love to believe it. We've looked at it for a decade, but there are other things you can discern, like, do you prefer to learn together or learn alone, right? Do you prefer to learn at the same time with others around you or on your own time? And so if you combine even those two simple dimensions, you'll have some people who like to learn together at the same time, which is project-based learning, right? You're kind of doing something together, you're applying things. And that was half of this group. And then you had another half of the group who prefer to learn alone on their own time. That's self-study.
Yeah.
Nobody in this group would have thrived in a classroom slash webinar setting, even though that's the only way that the training was being delivered. So once you start combining these insights in a way to answer specific questions, then you can get very practical answers versus good practice, general advice and this nonsense. It's not nonsense. I shouldn't be disparaging. It's just not actionable. And so at Ultranauts, right, like we're building a quality engineering business. We're getting brought our core business, a CIO at a big, large investment bank, bringing our team in to stop PII leakage. The stakes are high. It's high visibility. We need to work fast. And as I mentioned before, like the typical agile Scrum team at Knots will have teammates who are sensory avoiding and need blocks of protected time. Teammates who are sensory seeking and need bursts of interaction. Teammates who are non-speaking. Teammates who have severe anxiety. Teammates with complex PTSD, all on the same team. And so we had to take a much more data-driven way and an actionable way to set those teams up for success.
Mm-hmm.
And none of it involves sending you off to a 2-hour workshop on how to be inclusive.
So interesting to look at it, because I see the practicality and the connection back to intentional design. And I just pitched to speak at a conference this morning, and my takeaway is recognition. One of the takeaways is that inclusivity is a design opportunity. And it sounds like in the work that you've done, in the synthesis of the information that you've been able to generate, you've been able to then offer information back, which then helps the design of how we're working, which the default is you're being inclusive because you're now considering the parameters that you need to have everyone be able to contribute.
Yeah, and the way we think about it is simply that asking for what you need is a stopgap solution until the system you're interacting with and the norms of the group you're working with shift in order for it to work for everybody in the group, right? So like if I'm asking you for something on an ad hoc basis or on an exception basis, that's cognitive load that is not going to last. It's not tenable to keep remembering to give me the thing that I asked for. And so that's why we try to go from the biodex view, which is let's understand each other's preferences. Okay, but knowing that isn't necessarily going to change the group dynamics, the team
Mm-hmm.
norms. And if you can shift the team norms in a very surgical way, where you're taking all of the individual preferences to figure out what's the most important single thing you need to change. Is it
Mm-hmm.
about information sharing and let's get practical, or is it about decision making or conflict
Mm-hmm.
resolution, whatever, meetings?
Mm-hmm.
Because groups of humans, individual humans, have very little capacity to change. Groups of humans have even less capacity to
That's
change.
harder.
And
That's
so you
harder.
sort of have to take a continuous improvement approach of like pick one thing, do the thing, repeat the thing, make it a habit, pick
Yeah.
the next thing.
Yeah. I love your point about the fact that this should be a temporary situation until the climate or the environment is such that it's designing to be inclusive naturally. I think that's going to take a long time. I agree with you. I think the potential is there, but there's a massive shift that needs to be at play to counter a couple of things. One is false consensus effect, which is leaders thinking that, well, the way I think ought to be the way that you think. So why do I even need to think beyond the way that I think, right? Because this assumption is that don't you work the same way I do? And I've run into this with leaders very recently, and I still think that will continue for some time. And also add in this sense and recognition that to think this way is practical from a business sense. We need to step into empathy and compassion to understand someone's experience, to be able to think that this is valuable, and also connect it to the fact that this is also practical. And I think we have some bridges to cross in a lot of leadership spheres right now. Do you have any thoughts on that, Rajesh? And before you answer that, I just want to remind you all that are listening, you're welcome to put up your hand and we will invite you to be part of this conversation. If you have a question for Rajesh, if you have a question for me, we're ready to take your questions at any time. So put your hand up, or please feel free to direct message Rafael Dona, who's keeping eye on the chat, basically, so I don't look at it and blurt out your name by mistake. So Rajesh is the security on this call, and he will take your anonymous question and bring it to the stage as well. So, Rajesh, back to you with that question. Are we? This is a long-term evolution, I think.
Well, all changes,
Mhm.
it's, I mean, going to the starting a new habit to exercise more is going to take a while. So um, I think,
Well, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to just challenge you on that,
yeah.
because I know someone who, I think it's somebody telling me a story of their father who, when the packaged cigarettes hit $2.20, he was like, "That's it. That's my limit. I'm never smoking again," and he did. So I think there is the potential for change when something becomes, the pain of not changing becomes too great. I just think this situation, there's a slow erosion and marginalization of talent, and designing out, burning out, opting out, that there it's harder for leaders to come up to that moment that says, "Oh, the pain is too great."
So does every human have a threshold above which, change is going to be forced? Yeah, but that's, many dimensions, many types of thresholds. As a group, getting a group to change their behavior is a really tall order, right? So it doesn't matter what domain that's in, or
Mhm.
whether that's at work or school or at home, like a family trying to change your habits around how you engage in Socratic debate. Like it's not easy, right? So I think
True.
the way we think about this is that um, humans are terrible at changing. And so it's important to pick the most impactful, simple actions you can take on in the right direction, directionally to move,
Mhm.
and that requires precision of what exactly you want to do. And it has to tie back to the reason you're all together. The reason you're all together in the workplace is to get work done. And so
Mhm.
I don't think framing change in through the lens of what's good for me as an individual um, is the right is a reliable way to drive change versus even inclusion, right? So inclusion is often conflated with feelings of psychological safety or belonging. Those are related, they're different things. Inclusion, if you look at sort of the literature on this, in the inclusion in the workplace specifically, is better defined and more practically defined as the actions you take to remove the barriers that are preventing everybody on your team from doing their work. Do they have access to the information and knowledge they need to do their work? Do they have access to the interactions and relationships they need to do their work? And it's really important to end this sentence with "to do your work," because then it is
Yes.
about productivity and performance. And if what you're asking for are things you need to do your work, and maybe, yes, that will also help you develop a sense of belonging, which of course we do know leads to more cohesive teams, which ultimately improves productivity. But honestly, that's not how decisions get made in the workplace. And decisions do get made in the workplace if you tie it back to how to be more productive at an individual level of what I need to do my best work so I can deliver on
Mhm.
this thing that I need to deliver for the team, is
Mhm.
a very different conversation than, I need these things to feel included.
It's interesting to think about because what about the context? Take the task aside and take the feeling. And I'm thinking right now of being in an office, but it could extend to how you're being treated online or in a video conversation. If there is bullying, if there is microaggression, if those things inhibit someone's ability to express themselves, they're going to translate into an impact on effectively getting the work done. So how do you reconcile that the fact that they're related?
Oh, well, if there's bullying, that's a different scenario. Like if there's bullying and it's
Well,
not,
right now, I
you know,
would suggest the federal government in Canada comes across a bit like a bully in some of their mandates. They have a mandate to have employees return to the office, which is kicking in on Monday, September 9th. Everybody who's a core employee has to return at least 3 days a week, and executives at least 4 days a week, which you might as well
so
say almost full time, right?
yeah. So to me, that's not bullying. That's a um, rigid rule that is
Mhm.
going to kill productivity. You know,
Mhm.
uh,
Well, it's interesting, right? Right, because it's yes, they have the right to say where people work and so on, but they're linking it to productivity. They're conflating, I think, performance, equating performance with presence, and so it's interesting as they look. And I've seen and I've heard I've been interviewing people, and I've heard sort of a bullying posture in some of the communications, which is why, yes, you're right. It might, unless you've heard all of that, it might not appear to be that.
Well,
So,
I think it's, to me, sort of, let's say harassment, bullying, there are actual legal definitions around it, right? And it's very
mhm,
clear. It's cut and dry. If it's happening, it needs to stop. And
mhm,
if it doesn't stop, people need to leave. Like it's not, and then if there are, like, if there's different, very different interpretations that one team member has of what is bullying, and it's different from the sort
mhm,
of rules and laws and precedent, then that's a conversation about
mhm,
perceptions. But if it's black and white, it's black and white, and
mhm,
it's so. What I'm saying simply is this, which is, um, if you want change to happen in a workplace, you need to tie that change to the things that drive decisions in the workplace, which is
mhm,
getting work done. It's productivity, it's performance.
mhm,
Everything else is dependent on goodwill and personalities. And I just don't have that much faith in the species. Right? Like I would love to believe that, yeah, we're all going to do the right thing. We're all going to be compassionate and empathetic and understanding and patient with each other.
mhm,
But I don't have the evidence to believe that that is actually the case with
mhm,
most people.
mhm,
This is not to say it's good or bad, it's just what is. And so Therefore, our approach is going to design for that world that is, not the one we wish it were. And the
Mm-hmm.
way to get there, and our theory of change, is simply to make the changes actionable,
Mm-hmm.
to make it practical, and to tie it into the drivers of decisions of change in a workplace setting. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a couple examples. This remote stuff is interesting because, as you know, at Ultranauts, like, we're remote native. We've been that way for over a decade. We know no other way. Before COVID, it sounded crazy to people that we have people in 30 states across the US, couple Canadian provinces, everybody works from home.
Mm-hmm.
And among that team, we have teammates who are non-speaking, who are extremely uncomfortable in video, who managed to get through applying for a job, recruiting for the job, onboarding and training for the job, joining multiple project teams, and getting promoted without anybody seeing or hearing them. So that's the world we live in. That is not the world outside. And so
Mm-hmm.
when we think about taking what we've learned about actually redesigning work systems so that
Mm-hmm.
more humans can use their unique strengths and get on with the work, we've got to be real. We don't expect, for example, it took us 3 or 4 iterations. We actually figured out how to make performance reviews and promotions suck less. And I've worked at Microsoft, I've worked at Bain, at these high caliber organizations that are always like the best place to work. And for example, performance reviews and promotions are always done the same way. And I could spend an hour ripping apart that same way. But the reality is, there is a better way. It took us a lot of experimenting to get to that better way. The reason we did it was because not doing it the old way, like an annual performance review with a self-assessment, 360 input from peers and managers, and a synthesis from your line manager and do an overall assessment, right? That's
Yep.
the thing. So, why do we need a self-assessment, right? There's actually no practical purpose. Now, if you have severe anxiety and low confidence, it's a brutal exercise to subject yourself to. So why would
Mm-hmm.
we do that if there isn't a reason for a self-assessment, right? Number one. Number two, you have a bunch of people giving you 360 input, evaluating you on 6 dimensions, two of which they are terrible at. They have no business evaluating you on things they're not good at, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a team that has no tolerance for ambiguity or BS, right? We can't get away with this nonsense. They're like, well, hang on a second. And we're data engineer, like, we're data governance and data quality
Yeah.
engineers. So that kind of flawed process just cannot stand.
Yeah.
And then you have like performance evaluation forums where people are rating you on a scale of does not meet expectations to exceeds expectations. Let's think about
Mm-hmm.
that. Whose expectations?
Yeah.
Did you bother to tell me what they were beforehand? And does
Yeah.
input reviewer A's expectations actually
Yeah.
align with input reviewer B's? Because if not, the whole system is a fraud,
Yeah.
right? You're using a scale that's different from one person to another, and then you're
Yeah.
trying to synthesize the results. So all this to say, we figured out how to make promotions actually suck less. We call it community-driven promotions. We've now, gone through and designed the system. It can be replicated. We took it out into the world and we said, hey, guess what? We figured this out. You could
Mm-hmm.
actually make promotions high transparency and generate high quality decisions and create high procedural trust in your whole system. Because I guarantee you,
Yeah.
if you ask your average employee or teammate in any company of what do you think about your promotions process, they will say, no idea how it really works, and I'm not sure I trust it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But nobody's out there trying to overhaul their promotion process. So it doesn't matter that there is an answer if the reason to do it doesn't exist, which comes back
Yeah.
to why would I change my behavior on a team? Well,
Right.
because it helps us deliver the results on the team. That's
Yeah.
it. It starts and stops there.
Yeah. The why has to matter. Otherwise, nobody's looking for the answer. I want to first commend you for the making performance reviews and promotions suck less. That's super noble work that I think everyone will be happy to hear about. Um, we just have a few minutes before we close, so I'm going to make an invitation for anybody that has a question about what's it like to use the biodex? What's a conversation like with your employer if you start sharing this and bringing this in? If you've got a question for Rajesh, this is your moment to ask it right now. Put up your hand or drop a comment into Rafael Dona's DMs, and he will bring you to the stage. But I wanted to ask you, I think, in closing, is there, for organizations that I've worked with that have brought the biodex into their team and work, have they had any concerns about it bringing up disclosure of disability, and oh my gosh, now we need to now support that person because of the American ADA, for example, or if you're in Ontario where I am, the AODA. um, this is something that when I was building the work style profile, that people were cautioning me, HR is not, they're going to be too afraid to use this because it's bringing up conversations that they may be afraid to have. And before I throw it over to you, Rajesh, I keep inviting you to say something and interrupting. I just want to let everybody who's listening now, please go to clarekumar.com/fishbowl, and you'll be able to grab all the links to the biodex, to Team X, to additional information that Rajesh has shared with us, and to the work style profile as well. But I want to give the final word here to Rajesh and talking about where resistance might lie in an organization to having these conversations, which do touch on our individual challenges as they relate to the barriers to doing work.
So with the Biodex and really TeamX is the solution that teams can sign up for and pay for. The Biodex is a free tool, and it's being used by anyone really, and people don't need HR's permission to start using it because it's free, and it's on an open URL.
Yep.
With TeamX, we don't um, cut the data or disclose any sort of information on demographics, identity, disability stereotype, none of that. Because most people are not comfortable disclosing a disability, or certainly if they are neurodivergent, because oftentimes disclosure doesn't end well. It has a lot of my teammates at Ultranauts have had really terrible experiences in the past, and so why would you disclose and take that risk? And so with TeamX, it's a non-issue, again, because we're focusing on actions, very specific actions the team can take to remove organizational impedance, like to unblock performance of that team in achieving their goal. So maybe it's because you have some teammates who have auditory challenges.
I just lost your sound.
I think I'm back.
Oh, there we go. Now you're back.
Yeah, so some of the changes can be really simple, and it doesn't necessarily need to be positioned as a quote accommodation that someone with a disability needs, right? Do you need
100%.
a reason to just switch on captions or have a chat window open, or capture notes and next steps on a meeting? No, of course not, right? And so the hard part is picking what good practice, common sense practice, should you invest the sort of collective effort on changing next, because change is hard, and it's important to pick the right next thing. And that's where having tools like the Biodex or TeamX allows you to take a more sort of data driven and quick way to get to, okay, let's change this thing about the way we work next.
I love it. Well, everyone, I hope you will check out the Biodex, check out Team X work if you want that data-driven approach. If you're thinking about a human approach, and specifically around the how do we work together in the office, not, which is a different conversation and relates to performance and productivity, but it also relates to the other responsibilities we have as individuals, as caregivers, the challenges we have potentially getting to work, all of those kinds of things. That's what I look at in the work style profile and the total teamwork program. So two slightly different approaches, but still getting at how do we get the work done, and having tools to help leaders and their teams get there. So I want to thank you all for joining this Fishbowl Live. The next one we're doing in a couple of weeks, and we're going to talk about how to actually speak up for what you need. It's a part two. Thank you so much, Rajesh, for joining me today. In a couple of weeks, we're going to have Michael Bach, who's a well-known DEI. He calls it IDEA. Actually, inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, which is a big part of our conversation today. And also Julie Newman, who's an HR consultant. And we'll be talking about the difficult conversations that how it can be a little easier to ask for what you need, especially if we focus on overcoming these barriers. So thank you very, very much for joining. That's the end of this Fishbowl Live, and I wish you all an amazing day. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks so much, Claire. It's good to be here.
Thank you.